Hi, everyone. So I'm going to begin with a quote from Chinese, which says, "May you live in interesting times." It's actually a curse. So interesting times for the sweepstakes industry. A lot of growth, a lot of talking about it. I'm going to start with you, Bill.
All right.
Because we have so many regulatory pieces coming together, so much that the industry needs to deal with, state level, federal level. So what can you tell us about that regulatory challenge?
Well, I mean, there really isn't, I mean, if we're just talking about sweepstakes, and just let's define that for a moment. There are a lot of different types of sweepstakes, but if we're talking about what people have called social games, it's a combination of both a freemium platform, which is the brand, product, or service, and then it's coupled with sweepstakes. And the prevailing model is a dual currency. So there are gold coins or sweepstakes coins. There are many other types of sweepstakes, but I think that's the one we want to focus on here today. There's really no regulatory challenge because there's no regulation. There's been no regulation for just straight freemium gaming. It's been around since 2012. In addition, the sweepstakes model has actually been around since 2012 as well, and there's no regulation. And that shouldn't really surprise anyone in the audience. DFS remains unregulated in many states in which it's offered as a skill game. So, you know, it seems to me, based on my experience with all the different types of gaming that are out there, you have licensed gaming, which could be anything from sports wagering, iGaming in 7 states, or DFS in roughly 24 states, and everything else is unregulated in this country. So there really isn't a regulatory challenge. As we go through a little bit more, we can talk about litigation and other types of challenges, but from a regulatory standpoint, there really isn't any. Now, does that mean that the industry hasn't evolved to respond to regulatory action or the litigation, such as the Washington State casino litigation, which I was involved in and is pretty much wrapped up now? Just one good example about how at least the freemium or the freemium and sweepstakes model clients, participants have regulated themselves as an outcropping of the settlements in Washington. Most of the platforms that have payment processing and want to do business in 6 or 7 specific states have adopted the elements of the settlements from Washington State, which is posting responsible gaming information on your website, having self-exclusion and limits of that functionality on the platform, and then always having a free method of play. So one never has to purchase coins or the virtual coins in order to continue playing. The other way the area is regulated, in my opinion, is because the payment processing, unless you're taking crypto, they have requirements. You have to demonstrate you have geolocation, so you can exclude states in which you're not going to offer the games. And you also have to have a KYC and user verification method. Is it as rigorous as a licensed sports book? Perhaps not. But those are things the industry has taken upon itself to police. So it is not regulated, but it has taken steps that are consistent with what you might see in regulation.
Well, it's been more reactive than proactive?
Reactive to everything that happens. The way that the companies handle their terms of use and the click wraps and everything else. All the companies that were in the litigation in Washington had one thing in common. They didn't have a binding click wrap binding the users to an arbitration agreement. So they were subject to lawsuits and class action. Generally, if you have an effective click wrap, then you're going to avoid that. That's one way to avoid that type of litigation. And I think the industry's effectively now has that proper protection in place for themselves and putting the onus on individual users and disputes in arbitration. But that's a very reactive step that's been taken because lawyers like me are jumping up and down and saying, your terms of use, they're not enforceable. That's the first thing I always look at when I have a new client.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. Will, over to you. Let's take a step back to the product again. And I'm going to mention Sweepstake 1.0 versus Sweepstakes 2.0.
Oh.
How long has it been around?
Yeah, I mean, these products have been around for a really long time. There's whether or not people in the audience, whether or not people in the industry necessarily like it, there is a clear established legal precedent under which they operate, and you can debate the merits of that precedent. Bill just highlighted it at a very high level, but that is what it is. I think you can't really talk about 1.0 versus 2.0 without necessarily talking about the risk assessment. And obviously, in Bill's world, the legality of it is the core element of the risk assessment. I think that there's additional elements of that, though, as well, that really merit discussion. And it's not very scientific, so people don't often like to say it. But part of that risk assessment is, what does it feel like? Does this product feel like gambling? Does this product make a lot of money? Does it maybe make things inconvenient for industry incumbents? That is the realistic risk assessment, in addition to, obviously, where Bill spends his time focusing on the legality. That goes into not just, what will a court say, but what is the viability of this whole sector going forward? And there's a wide breadth of different types of sweepstakes products. Bill just hit on it, and I think it really does merit mention. You asked how long has this been around? I mean, I want to go back to, 1796. Well, whoa, not 1796.
It's
sorry.
pure brand promotion.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is.
It is, yeah. Sorry, 1976. I think a sweepstakes in 1796 would be like George Washington running around saying, join the Revolutionary Guard and win a musket.
Well, it's
right?
a brand.
Yeah, no, not 1796, 1976. I believe it was the Montreal Olympics, if I'm not mistaken. McDonald's did their Monopoly sweepstakes, and it's not McDonald's Monopoly is the example that everybody gives, right, for sweepstakes, and I put that into 1.0. This was not Monopoly. This was get an Olympics card with your meal. Well, what's an Olympics card? An Olympics card says if the U.S. wins a medal in event X at the Olympics, you get something, right? I think it was if they win a gold medal, you get a Big Mac. If they win a silver medal, you get French fries, right? If they win a bronze medal, you get high cholesterol. Thanks for coming in. But the point is that people bought something over here. They bought a burger, and then over here they got a game piece, whatever you want to call it, that allowed them to win something of value on the outcome of a sporting event. And no one is talking about this sort of thing today. As Bill said at the start of the panel, this is probably, we want to focus up here maybe more on 2.0, and I totally get that. That's, what this is all about. The word controversy is in the title of this panel. Thank you, iGaming Next. The word, controversy wouldn't be here if we were talking about, McDonald's Monopoly, right? It wouldn't be here if we were talking about Starbucks for Life, or the HGTV home giveaway, or the Comcast Xfinity Super Bowl sweepstakes that just happened a month ago. But the conversation has really pivoted away from this. But in a roundabout way of answering your question, they've been around for over 50, 60 years, and they've taken on many different forms. And I think the spectrum of sweepstakes, not just 2.0, is a really interesting element of how we're going to see this sector grow moving forward.
Yeah.
I would just add the one thing that they all have in common, including that old contest, is that there's no entry fee.
Right.
A person enters for free. So if a person enters for free, then the underlying game could conceivably be based on anything. Right. And that's because gambling is prize, chance, and consideration. If you take one of those things away generally, then you can have a sweepstakes. In the case of a sweepstakes, there's no consideration, and there's a free entry method, regardless of what type of model you're using.
Player is not risking anything at the very
They're not. Now, like buying a cheeseburger and getting a Monopoly ticket, there is a purchase involved, but that's solved through, at least American law, by the existence of an alternative method of entry. And that's really the differentiator between sweepstakes and an actual real money gaming contest.
Right. Yes.
And freemium, as long as we talk about that, and that's part of what we're talking about here today, the element that's missing on that side of the model is prize. Because, yes, some people may pay to play and get a license to use more coins on the platform, but in the end, they're really only getting entertainment. On the freemium side of the platform, there's no prize. So there's your legal model for freemium, and then you have a legal model for both freemium plus sweepstakes, and they are separate.
But there are missing pieces in the definition of gambling all over. So that's, I think you touched two very important things, which is like the buy-in and the actual price. Also, they say, I mean, to your point on responsible gambling, everyone I've spoken in terms of responsible gambling, if there is no price, there's no addiction. That's what I've heard a number of times. I don't know what you would think, Bill.
I mean, I'm not an expert on gaming or gambling addiction. In my mind, the companies are taking measures such as that they're not really actually required to do, such as self-exclusion, such as allowing players to set limits. Those are really the only tools that they have. So I think that they've gone beyond where they need to because there is no regulation. In terms of addiction and safety of the players, I mean, an earlier panel made a really good point, and that is all of these forms of gaming are really what the consumers want to do, and they're doing. The type of gaming that we don't talk about enough, that we should be talking about, is actual offshore gambling, which, as someone pointed out earlier, I don't know if it was Adam Greenblatt or somebody else, but on that panel, they pointed out like a 14-year-old with internet access can go place a sports wager on an offshore platform because there's zero KYC, there's zero anything. That's really the big, to me, that's the big topic in gaming. Not that people can, get on the Double Down app, which they've been able to do since 2012 on the Apple platform. There are at least 400 or 500 just freemium gaming apps on the Apple and Google Play network, okay? It is to scale. This is not a new controversy or anything like that. The controversy is why we, I guess as an industry or more as government, why don't we do something to actually stop the offshore gambling that is the most harmful thing that is out there in the child environment and also senior citizens. There's so many people vulnerable to that type of gaming, and it's frankly probably still bigger than all of the regulated and these other types of forms of gaming.
I think the short answer to that is also it's very challenging for different regulators around the world to put their heads together and figure out the real legal instruments to do it. And there's also technology, an obvious technology angle to it. I mean, we'll know the internet really has no borders. And I don't think as an industry we've been good enough at actually self-regulating in that respect, and the illegal market is huge. But one thing I want to touch upon with you, Will, I mean, Bill, you mentioned what consumers want to play. Also, earlier on the M&A panel, we discussed, kind of the trends. On Sweepstakes, Will, all these companies, I mean, we have two things going on. I think an inflow of startups coming into the space, and at the same time, you have all the big guys wanting to have as much as they can on the shelf. So how do you think Sweepstakes fits into all of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I would just go back really quickly to something that you said, the concept of, well, no prize, no addiction. Again, I'll be the first to admit I am also not an expert anyway on any of that.
I've repeatedly heard.
But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps the question is, if there's truly no buy-in, is there no addiction? I'm not answering that question. I'm posing that question. And I also know that, again, Sweeps 1.0, Sweeps 2.0, Sweeps 1.5, wide breadth of products where there is sometimes more realistically than not a buy-in, even though legally that's not what it is. But I would frame it more around that way. In terms of operators, and I mean LSB, iGaming operators, fitting Sweeps into a broader portfolio, I know there are operators looking at that currently, and why wouldn't you, right? I mean, Sweeps is it's sort of on I would say the precipice of having its moment in the sun, right? Whether it wants to have one or not. That's going to be, I think, the most dominant talked about vertical of 2024, just like, player pick'em DFS was in 23. I get back to, most people know the quote from Chris Grove, the patron saint of conference talking points, and he's like obviously one of the best, but he'll always say, the operator with the most products on the store shelves will win. And I do agree with that. I'm advocating for that point. It was actually, I think it was the GOAT, I think it was Denise Coates that first came up with that, and 365 does a good job of that overseas. Here, I think DraftKings is really kind of leading the way in terms of just setting an example of a ton of robust, different types of products. Everybody saw the Jackpocket acquisition. If you go up to that header, right, on their site, that's a crowded header, right? Everybody looks at online casino, they look at betting, but if you go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items down that line, you've got social betting, you've got pools, you'll have the Jackpocket element of it, right? You've got Pick 6, which they just launched. So these storefronts really are burgeoning. I think, again, I get back to 1.0 versus 2.0. I think part of what will really determine whether and how operators integrate a sweeps product into their storefront or not, it really comes down to two things. Are you going to make sure that what you are doing as a sweepstakes operator is actually additive to the industry in some way, regardless of the type of sweeps that you operate? What type of partnerships are you forging now? What type of value proposition are you explaining to operators? Or are you going to go down the path of operating in parallel? There's nothing really to see here. We're very, very legal, which I agree they are. But are we very? We're very legal. There's nothing to see here, right? And how does that often work out? Right? So one, I think, is how are you proving an additive value proposition to operators, right? Regardless of the format. And then two, I think, will there be some sort of middle ground product? Obviously, if there is more development along the lines of Sweepstakes 1.0, which very few people relatively are talking about, DraftKings is not going to start, selling game pieces right at somebody's drive-thru. But would they emulate something like, Double Down? I don't know. But as we see more innovation in that space, where on the spectrum will that innovation be? I think that's a separate point that will also determine how well could an operator either integrate a sweepstakes product into their sort of burgeoning storefront environment, or work with a third-party sweepstakes provider, right, in an actually constructive way, rather than a way that, fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, and we have 9 letters from different attorneys general saying, please stop. Right.
Yeah. If I could just add, and DraftKings is a great example, they actually do have a form of game piece already that is gamified, and they launched Rainmakers, where people buy NFTs and you can trade them on their platform. And there's a lot of litigation on this, and we don't have time for that, but on the antitrust issues and some other things that are going on. But that's a gamified NFT that people can then use in games and win real money. So there's a lot there, there's a lot of pressure to capture a user and get them onto one of your particular type of games, and that's why the omni-channel idea or approach exists, and that's why you see a lot of recent acquisitions. And I just saw FanDuel just purchased an iGaming company, and we have a lot of that. Okay, the question specifically is whether these operators will get into sweepstakes or not. Well, they're already in freemium. So the differentiator between who is involved in the freemium industry, and mind you, this is tens of billions of dollars in freemium. And then we have, I don't know the recent measurement, but the largest operator in the freemium plus sweepstakes space is VGW, and they have Lucky Land and Chumba. They do over $3 or $4 billion last year in their fiscal year. So it is it's got a lot of room to grow. It has a lot of room, but it's been around for a long time. So it's not like some brand new controversy. But the issue here is, will the people, the industry participants who are licensed operators, meaning they sell games to licensed casinos, they have online sports books, they have online iGaming products, they license their content to the licensed gambling industry, will they be involved in promoting and taking on sweepstakes as well? They're already in freemium and have been for many years. In my mind, there's no less or more regulation or question regarding compliance with respect to freemium than there is with sweepstakes. But that seems to be the dividing line. So I think what we're going to be looking for is, let's see if any licensed gambling operator, someone who holds a license, will go into freemium, or if they're already in freemium, will add sweepstakes. I think what we've seen so far, if we've seen litigation in Washington and some other states geared toward freemium, there's litigation, and by that I mean consumer litigation, like class actions or private attorney general actions under really old statutes that date back to before the Magna Carta, that allow third parties to sue for the gambling losses of others to sort of enforce gambling morality, going back to the 1700s in the Victorian era. Most of those were passed then in the United States. But that'll be the big litmus test. We'll see who goes into the sweepstakes space. Now, mind you, licensed vendors are providing content. So you do see games that you could play on a licensed iGaming platform or play in a casino that are also on the freemium sites and the sweepstakes sites. So we have licensed gaming vendors who are providing content to the industry. The only other than the litigation, which has been transformative in a lot of ways, that's ongoing. There have been 2 states that have taken any sort of action whatsoever with respect to the sweepstakes model. That's Michigan. And they took issue with not this model, but a charity, a company that was selling charity entries, and you would just win a prize, but it was supposedly for charity. That was called Golden Heart, and they issued a press release, Michigan did recently, on this subject. They also took the position in Michigan that the sweepstakes games were not lawful, and they weren't really super specific about it. But mind you, Michigan is a state that has licensed iGaming. So in the same way that we see states that have licensed sports betting taking positions on pick'em, we see that in the sweepstakes space in Michigan. The only other state that has taken any action with respect to the sweepstakes component of both freemium and sweepstakes is Montana. So most of the market leaders have withdrawn from Michigan and Montana. And then some offer games in Washington, some don't. In my view, there's no reason not to do it in Washington if you have the responsible measures in place from those settlements. But that's what we've seen, a state-by-state approach. What will happen in the next year, we'll see if any other states take a position. But I don't think that the laws that they would raise are super clear for them to take a position that it's unlawful. And certainly there's payment processing for these games, both freemium and sweepstakes. Yeah. So that'll be the thing to watch for in 2024, 2025.
I mean, you mentioned the sort of the DFS and the pick'em route. I think the parallels between, you can say that the legal structures are different, and they are, but the parallels between what has happened with player prop pick'em in the last 18 months and where theoretically sweeps could go, right, is painstakingly obvious, right? You all didn't come here to, listen to reruns. You want new insights about the future. So I won't go into that, but it's painfully obvious. So what are the key factors that will determine from an operational, from a legal, from a compliance standpoint, whether or not that happens? And I get back to the industry, in my view, and I know that there are efforts that I'm not directly privy to, but indirectly privy to sort of begin organizing within the sector and getting representation and getting established. I know you're sort of adjacent to those as well, Bill. I think those are really, really positive efforts, right? A fragmented, disorganized industry does not have a core value proposition to powerful incumbents. An organized industry can translate that value proposition and can act on it, right? So I think that's a key aspect when we talk about being additive. It's also a key aspect when we talk about maybe communicating with, in this example, Michigan or other state regulators. Why is it illegal? Let's talk about that. And getting to what Bill was talking about earlier, there's, I think, about 19 offshore betting operators that are in the queue to be dealt with that we've been waiting on for.
But offshore is very difficult to deal with, as we were saying. I think one of the biggest challenge here, and to your point on getting organized, being a united front in this industry is usually pretty difficult.
Yep.
I've seen this in many places around the world. I think one challenge is that on that shelf, that operators would eventually have, including sweepstake. You would have what I call the gateway products, and then the actual gambling products and how they cross-sell, and it's going to be really hard to get that into regulators' minds because they would see it as one thing. They would approach it in a very same way with the very same mindset, and it's actually pretty different.
I think it will be until you get to point 3 of what I was just going to say, which is how do you actually find a way to proactively work with operators? And I know that's difficult. I know people might go, what? What do you mean? You know, that's a competitive product. It doesn't necessarily have to be, because if you're competing and you're running along over here, that's all well and good until incumbents with more leverage than you decide that it's not good, and then that's bad. And so that feeds into the whole let's make hay while the sun shines sort of mentality, which is great for a few years. It's not great for longevity, right? So I think until you get to that third point of how do we fit into your storefront, DraftKings, or how can we, you know, sweepstakes company X, actually drive revenue and drive customers in some sort of partnership to a company that's in the regulated environment, then you'll be really shocked how the Michigan regulator or other regulators might maybe take a different view, right? If they're part of the family. I mean, that's just, we're talking about sausage making here, but that's really what it is.
Yeah, but it's dangerous because it's going to be mixed up eventually.
Yeah, I think the longer it stays sort of head down, nothing to see, you know, we're just operating over here, right?
You know, the educational effort is very clear in my mind. I'm wondering, I mean, Bill, what do you think regulators could?
I'm a bit cynical about the ability to get regulations in place for any of the types of gaming that we've been talking about. There's still, you know, DFS is a great example. It has gone on a state-by-state basis. It's regulated in some states, it's registered in others, but in 20, it's still, you know, it's offered on the model that it's a real money skill game under the laws of that state. There's really no regulation whatsoever. So, and it's not, I don't think it's for lack of trying. I think it's obviously difficult. We're not going to get the federal government to come in and do anything, nor does I think anybody want that. But it's a state by state. And Kentucky is an interesting example because Kentucky recently, effective June of last year, they amended their definition of gambling to exclude the award of free games. So that covers your freemium model, right? Because even if you have the theory that you're playing and you get more time and that's value, then that takes it out. But that's one example. I'm sure it was hard fought from a lobbying standpoint. And it's really state by state. Everyone who's involved in this industry knows that you're not going to see some sort of uniform set of regulations across 50 states. Yeah. The dynamics in every state is just way too different for gambling. So I don't think you're going to see actually any type of promising form of regulation at all.
Okay.
Ever.
Well, we'll run out of time actually. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Also.